Hello dear students, this is chapter 3, formation of pollen in the part of reproduction in flower and plant. Now here if we look at the flower contains the male and female reproductive organs of the flower. It contains the male, which is the most important one, is the anther. The anther produces pollen grains, pollen. And this is pollen. If you look at pollen here in the anther, and here we have the carpel, which contains the ovary, which contains the ovule, which forms the eggs of the flower, which is the ovule. And here we have the male and the female reproductive organs of the flower. And this is a bisexual flower which contains both. We have some flowers which contains only the male parts. We have other type of flowers which contain only the female parts, but this one has the both reproductive organs of the plant. Now here the anther, this is the anther which forms the pollen. If we look at these small grains, these are the pollen grains, which are the gametes. These are the gametes of the flower, the male gametes. And here we have the ovule, which is the female gametes of the flower, but here we have the male, which is the pollen, which contains half of the genetic material, which will meet with the female genetic material, half of them, so they can form the zygote and seed. Then it can be planted to make a new plant. Now here we're going to look at the formation of pollen. We're going to see how these pollen grains are made in the anther. Here, if we look at the structure of the anther, if we look at here, this is the anther. This is the anther. If we cut it, if we have a cross cut of it, we are going to see it has like 4 chambers. We call them pollen sacs. Now these pollen sacs, in each one we will find a cell here. We'll find many cells here in these pollen grains. Now here, one of them will just like magnify it. It will be like this one cell. This is one mother cell. Then it's going to divide by meiosis. It's going to give us 2 cells. It's going to divide another time by meiosis. It's going to give us 4 cells. Every cell has 1n number of chromosomes. Now this one, the pollen mother cell, has 2n number of chromosomes. But after meiosis 1, meiosis 2 divides, then it's going every cell to have 1n number of chromosomes. Now these cells will differentiate. Then everyone will be a microspore. Now this cell, we call it a microspore. This is the cell which will develop into the mature pollen grain. Now this microspore is going to go through mitosis. Now is going to divide by mitosis to give us 2 nuclei in it. So here we'll have 2 nuclei inside of it. One nucleus will be a generative nucleus, which will go to fertilize the ovule. And the other one is going to be a vegetative. We call it vegetative, or we call it pollen tube, which will make the tube, which will go down to the we'll see that later in fertilization, but this will make the tube through which the other nuclei will go down to meet the egg cell and to fertilize it. Now here, this one, the microspore, is going to divide first by mitosis to have 2 nuclei, and now it will keep growing and maturing. It will have 2 layers. Now this external layer is called exine, and this one is intine. It has 2 layers and has 2 nuclei inside of them. Now we call this mature pollen grain. Now after division, it will keep dividing. The cells, pollen mother cells, will keep dividing inside of the pollen sac here in the pollen sac. Then after many divisions, this pollen sac is going to burst open and release the pollen to the just pollen will be released out of this pollen sac. Then they can be carried by insects or by wind or by whatever to go to meet the stigma of the flower, so it can fertilize the ovule of the flower. Now here, let's look at the formation of ovule. We already saw how a pollen grain is made. Now let's look at the ovule, how it is made. The ovule is made in this part, in the ovary of the flower. And how that happens, so this is the female reproductive organs. We have the stigma, style, and ovary, and all of them make the carpel of the flower. And now we are going to see how the ovule is formed inside of the ovary. We're going to see this is how it happens. The flower here has the ovary, and here it will start having the ovule here. But let's have a better photo of this part of the flower and how it is. Now if we just magnify this part of the flower, it will look like this one. This is the ovule, and here if you look at the ovule, it is surrounded by two layers. We call them integments. In this integments there is an opening. It is called microply. Through the microply, the pollen tube is going to go, and the pollen nuclei will enter to the ovule to fertilize the egg through this opening, which is the microply. And here we're going to see that this part of the stalk, it is called the funiculus. The funiculus is develops into the stalk of the flower, and these are the parts of the ovule. So here we have the megasporocyte cell, which contains 2N, will divide the first time by meiosis. It will divide by meiosis to give us four cells. Every cell has 1N of chromosome. So if you look here, we have 4 cells. Every cell contains 1N number of chromosome. Here we'll have 4 cells, and 3 of them will degenerate. They will just disappear. 3 cells of these 4 will degenerate, disappear. Now we'll still have here 1 cell. It is called megaspore, which has 1N number of chromosome. Now this megaspore is going to divide by mitosis, not meiosis. Is going to divide by mitosis to give us 2 cells with 1N. Now question for you, my smart students. What happens if this one megaspore divides by meiosis, not mitosis? It is already 1N. If it divides by meiosis, it will be half N. Because as we know, meiosis gives us half of the genetic material. So it doesn't divide by meiosis, it divides by mitosis. The first division by mitosis gives us 2 cells. Now these 2 cells will go through another division by mitosis, but it is 2 times. So 2 cells will divide the first time by mitosis. They will give us like 2 cells. Now I have 4 cells. They will divide another time by mitosis. We will have other 4 cells. So here we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the total number of nuclei after the 2 division of mitosis will be 8 nuclei, not 8 cells. It will be 8 nuclei. Now here, if we look at these, 4 nuclei will go to each side. So in the upper side we will have 4 nuclei, in the lower side we will have 4 nuclei, and in the middle 2 nuclei will be there in the middle. These we call them these polar nuclei. Now in the middle we'll have 2 polar nuclei. Upper here we'll have 3 cells, And here we have three cells. Here the upper three cells, they are called antipodals, and these two cells here, these syringids, and the one in the middle, this one in the middle, this one is the most important one, because this one will be the egg cell which will be fertilized to make the zygote. So this one here, after all the divisions, we will call it the mature ovule. Okay, this is the mature ovule sac. Now this one, the mature embryo, we call it mature embryo sac, contains how many cells? If we look here, we have how many cells? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this, the large one with the 2 nuclei, is the 7th. So here we have 7 cells in the mature embryo sac. We have 7 cells. And how many nuclei are in these 7 cells? Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 nuclei. So the mature embryo sac contains 7 cells and 8 nuclei, and this is very important. You need to understand it. Now this ovule is ready for fertilization, and fertilization now, and pollination and fertilization can take place, and this is what we will see now later here. Let's go to pollination. First, pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen. Now this is the mature pollen grain, as we said before. This is the pollen grain. When it transfers from the anther to the stigma of the flower, this is, we call it pollination. So just the transfer of the pollen is pollination. Now we will go through the next stage. We call it fertilization. Fertilization, what happens? We saw before that the pollen has 2 nuclei. One will be pollen tube. Now here I'm going to draw this nucleus will start making this pollen tube. This is as you can see it here. This is the pollen tube. It is made by the pollen. It is made by the tube nucleus, or the nucleus, which we call it vegetative nucleus, and it will penetrate these by lytic enzyme. There's an enzyme that helps it to penetrate the stigma, style, and ovary until it reaches the microply, the opening here. Now this is the first step. Here, one nucleus, we are done with it. It became the pollen nucleus. This is this nucleus. It made the pollen tube. Now we have the second nucleus. This is the generative nucleus. It will divide. Now it will divide to have 2 nuclei. Now this one nucleus, it will divide again by mitosis to give us 2 nuclei. Why? Because here we will have double fertilization. In this case, we have double fertilization. The first nucleus here, let's refer to this one. The first nucleus will go down here. It will go down. Let's say this is the first nucleus. It will fertilize the egg cell. Now the egg cell is fertilized. Now it is 2N. Now this egg cell is going to make the zygote. The zygote, which will be the embryo, will develop into the embryo. Now this is the first fertilization. Let's go to the second fertilization. So this is the second nucleus. We're done with it. We still have 1 nucleus. The second nucleus, generative nucleus, is going to go down the same, but it is going to go to the middle here. Inside of, is going to join with these 2 nuclei. Now these 3 nuclei together will have fertilization to produce the primary endosperm. which has 3 in number of chromosomes. So here, the primary endosperm has 3n number of chromosomes. Now this one, the primary endosperm, is going to be the food, of the embryo, which has been fertilized. Now here we have the embryo, and here we'll have the food of it, which will help it to grow and survive. Now here we're done with pollination and fertilization, and we saw how it happens. Let's go to the one after it. After fertilization, a seed will be formed. Now the ovule will become a seed, and this seed is the part of the plant which can be planted to have a new plant, and sexual reproduction happens by seeds, and we saw how seeds are going to be formed. Now here we have two types of seeds. We have one, endospermic seeds. Two, we have non-endospermic seeds. Now what is the difference between them? The difference is this one, the endospermic, has endosperm because the embryo is small. It will not eat all the food, so part of it will just feed on some of the endosperm and the rest will stay there. So we call this seed endosperm. But in this case, like dicots, this is in monocots seeds, and this is in dicots. In dicots, like the seeds which can be split into two halves, like the beans and others. Now here, if you look, the embryo is large, so it feeds on most of the endosperm. So the seed is described as non-endospermic seed. Now here, if we look at the embryo is made of two parts. It has the radicle and it has the plumule. Now when you plant the seed on the ground, this radicle is going to make the roots of the plant, and the plumule is the part which will grow to make the shoot of the plant. So the embryo is the embryo has two parts, radicle and plumule. Radicle becomes the root, plumule becomes the shoot, which is the stem and the vegetative parts of the flower. And that is it about formation of the seed. Now after the seed is formed, or after fertilization, what will happen? A hormone will be produced in the ovary of the flower, and it will make it turn into a fruit. Now the ovary of the flower is going to turn into a fruit. Inside of the fruit we have the seed, which can be used for reproduction in plants, to reproduce and to have a new plant. Now here let's look at the fruit. Formation of the fruit. The fruit is made of precursor, which contains 3 layers. Now here, the part of the ovary is going to swell up and is going to develop into a fruit. The fruit has 3 parts. It has the precursor, which are the walls of the fruit. Here we have endocarp, which is this layer which protect the seed, which is very hard. It is the inner layer. We have the mesospore. We have the mesocarp. Then we have the mesocarp. The mesocarp is the fleshy middle part which we usually eat in the fruit. And here the outer layer is called exocarp, which protect the fruit, which is the outer skin-like layer of the fruit. And here the fruit, after we eat it, this is what is the most important part of reproduction, is the seed, which is used to be planted and to germinate and to have a new plant. I hope this is clear. Until next lesson, ciao.